didn't mean for it to happen, Mabel. You gotta believe me.
Mabel, don't go. You know this is your home.
Mabel stood still, the weight of the day's events pressing down on her. She stared at the cowboy as he fiddled with the worn cuffs of his shirt. The room was dim, lit only by the faint flicker of the candle on the nightstand. Outside, the wind howled, the storm still raging as if it had a life of its own. Inside, everything was still. The silence between them felt thick, uncomfortable. She didn't know how to start, or if it even mattered anymore. She had already made her choice. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice hoarse, the tension in the room obvious in the rasp of his words. "I didn't expect this." His eyes met hers briefly, before darting away. "Didn't expect you to take me in. Didn't expect any of this." Mabel swallowed, her throat dry. She knew what he meant. She hadn't expected it either. Her late husband's shadow loomed large in the room. There was no escaping it. "You don't get to talk about what you expected," she said, her voice low but firm. "You're not the only one with things to answer for." He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable under her gaze. "I ain't here to make you answer for nothing." "Then what the hell are you here for?" Mabel's words were sharp, cutting through the air like the crack of a whip. The cowboy looked down at his hands, rough and calloused. He didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure himself. "You think I want this?" His voice cracked, betraying him. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I didn't plan this." Mabel's chest tightened. She crossed her arms over her swollen belly. "I don't want to know what you planned." The cowboy looked up at her, the weight of their unspoken truth hanging between them. "Then why did you marry me?" The question was simple, but it cut deep. Mabel's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't back down. She had made the decision, no matter how sudden, no matter how wrong it felt. "Because I needed you to stay," she said, her words deliberate, yet soft. "I needed to stop pretending everything was still the same." The cowboy stood up slowly, his movements stiff. He walked over to the window, staring out at the storm. The wind rattled the window panes, as if urging him to leave. He didn't. "You don't get it," he said after a long pause. "I'm not the man you think I am." She wasn't sure what he meant. He hadn't been that man since the moment he stumbled into her life, bloodied and broken. "I don't need you to be someone you're not." "I just need you here," she said, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. He turned to face her then, his eyes dark, filled with something she couldn't place. "What happens when you realize you don't need me anymore?" Mabel's heart raced, and for a split second, she felt the old ache of loneliness creep up her spine. "Then I'll deal with it," she said quietly, the words leaving her lips like an echo of something she didn't fully believe. The cowboy let out a dry laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's a hell of a thing to say when you're tied to me now." "When we're tied to each other." Mabel stepped forward, the sudden movement catching him off guard. "Don't make this into something it isn't." He stepped closer, his presence too close now, the heat of his body mixing with the chill in the air. "I'm not making anything. You did that." She flinched at his proximity, but something inside her refused to back away. "I made a choice. You're here now, and so are we." The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Mabel's mind raced, but she couldn't find the words to fill the space. She had known, deep down, what she was doing when she married him. She had needed the control, the sense that her life wasn't spiraling out of her hands. But now, standing here with him, the reality of it all hit her like a punch to the gut. The cowboy's voice broke the silence again. This isn't a fairy tale, Mabel. Ain't no happy ending in sight. Her heart fluttered, the truth of it stinging her more than she expected. I never thought it would be. There was a long pause, the only sound the howl of the wind outside. The cowboy seemed to soften, just slightly, but it wasn't enough. Then what the hell are we doing here? Mabel looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since they had been married. His face was worn, tired, a map of the hard life he'd led. She saw the man who had crossed her path like a storm, and she couldn't deny the pull he had on her. Not because of love, but because of something deeper, something darker. I don't know, she whispered. I'm just trying to survive. He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. Me too. They stood there in silence, two broken people bound together by circumstance, by desperation. There was no love between them. No grand romance. Just the raw, brutal reality of their choices. Mabel's eyes flickered to the bed behind them, and for a moment, she saw the reflection of her late husband in the darkened window. She shook her head, as if to clear it, but the image lingered. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside her, a constant clash of past and present, of what was and what could never be again. You can leave, you know, she said, the words soft but firm. You don't have to stay. The cowboy stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned back to the window, watching the storm rage outside. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. Mabel felt the room close in around her, the weight of the decision she had made pressing down harder with each passing second. She had thought she could handle this. That somehow, bringing him into her life would be the answer to everything. But now, standing here, she wasn't so sure. The cowboy's words from earlier echoed in her mind. What happens when you realize you don't need me anymore? She didn't know. She wasn't sure she ever would. But for now, they were together, bound by a choice neither of them fully understood. And for the first time in days, the silence between them didn't feel like a ghost. It felt like the only thing they had left. The storm raged on outside, but inside, everything was still. Mabel sat at the kitchen table, the morning light creeping through the small window, but it didn't seem to warm the room. The cowboy was asleep on the couch, his body a tangle of blankets and sweat. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was still here, not just because of the injury, but because of something else. Something familiar. His name lingered in her mind like a whisper, something she had heard before but couldn't place. The faint sound of him stirring broke her thoughts. She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing as he shifted on the couch, his arm jerking slightly, as if dreaming. His brow furrowed, and for a moment, he looked like a man tortured by ghosts. Mabel watched him carefully, her fingers tightening around the edge of her mug. She had to ask him, had to know. She couldn't wait anymore. Mister, she started, her voice steady, but there was something raw underneath it. She wasn't sure if she could keep it all together for much longer. What's your real name? His eyes opened slowly, and for a moment, he just stared at her, his face unreadable. Then, he sat up with a grunt, the covers falling to his waist. His muscles tensed, the movements still stiff from the pain of his injuries. I told you already, he muttered, his voice rough. No, Mabel snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. No, you didn't. You told me a name, but it doesn't fit. I've heard it before. From my husband, I think. So I'm asking you again, what's your real name? He didn't respond right away, and Mabel could feel the shift in the air, the room closing in around them like a trap. His gaze flickered to the window, avoiding her eyes, as if trying to buy time. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Don't lie to me, she said, stepping closer, her fists clenched. Tell me. The cowboy finally met her eyes, the weight of the silence between them like a thick fog. Then, he spoke in a low voice, his words slow and careful. You've heard it right enough. My name's Henry. She froze. Henry. The name hit her like a slap. Her husband, the one who had died just over a year ago, had said that name in his final days. Henry. A name that felt tied to something broken. To betrayal. Her breath caught in her throat. I knew it, Mabel whispered, her face pale. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. She backed away, her hand pressed to her mouth, trying to calm the frantic thoughts swirling in her mind. How the hell do you know that name? Henry, or whoever he was, stood up slowly, his movements careful. I didn't mean for you to find out. Hell, I didn't even mean to be here. He took a step toward her, but Mabel backed away, as if his presence was now something foreign, something dangerous. You're lying. You're not just some drifter, are you? Mabel's voice shook, but she forced herself to stand her ground. You've been watching me. You knew exactly who I was when you showed up at my door. Henry let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the world had settled on him. I didn't come here to hurt you. I swear. He paused. But your husband, he was involved in something I couldn't walk away from. Her heart skipped a beat. The words hit her like a cold gust of wind, blowing through every memory she tried to bury. What do you mean? My husband was dead when you got here. There's nothing left for you two. You don't get it, do you? Henry's voice was harsh now, frustration breaking through the calm facade. Your husband, he didn't just die. He was taken. By people like me. People who don't give a damn about right or wrong. Mabel's stomach turned. She wanted to scream, to throw something, but the words stuck in her throat. You're saying. I'm saying your husband didn't just get sick. He crossed the wrong people. Henry took a step closer to her, his eyes filled with a sadness she couldn't quite understand. And I've been running from them ever since. Mabel shook her head. No. No, this isn't happening. I don't. You think I want this? Henry cut her off, his voice low, raw. I don't. But you're in it now. You're tied up in this mess whether you like it or not. They'll come for you too. He met her eyes, his expression hard, but there was something like a plea buried in it. You don't have a choice anymore. The room felt smaller. Mabel's heart pounded in her chest as everything she thought she knew about her life crumbled. Her husband had been a part of something dangerous, something dark. And now, she was pulled into it too. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of his words. Henry didn't move. Neither did she. Her mind raced, each thought a blur of panic and confusion. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. What do we do now? Henry ran a hand through his hair, the tension in his jaw apparent. We wait. We keep our heads down. And we hope they don't come for us. He paused, then added, almost to himself, but they always do. Mabel stared at him, her mind reeling, but a part of her understood. There was no going back. There never had been. The storm outside had nothing on the storm brewing inside her. Well, she said finally, her voice steady despite the shaking in her chest, if we're in this together now, then we do it my way. Henry nodded, but his face was unreadable. He knew she wasn't going to back down, not now. Not after everything. But he also knew, deep down, that survival wasn't something you could just will into existence. And in that silence, something shifted. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm waiting to tear through their lives. Mabel stood by the stove, the scent of coffee filling the room, but it didn't ease the tightness in her chest. The morning after Henry's confession, everything felt different, as if the walls of her house had closed in around her. Her pregnancy pressed on her like a heavy weight, but it was the new tension in the air that made it harder to breathe. Henry hadn't said much since the storm had settled the night before, and neither had she. There was too much in the space between them, too many things unsaid. When she turned from the stove, he was standing by the window again, just like the night before. His back was to her, but she could feel his gaze heavy on her, like he was waiting for something. Maybe an apology, maybe an explanation. But she didn't have either. She placed the coffee cup down on the table with a clink, the sound sharper than it should have been. You could at least sit down. Henry didn't move at first. His eyes stayed fixed on the swirling dark clouds hanging in the sky, as if they could offer him something he didn't know how to ask for. Finally, he turned and crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate. He didn't speak, but when he sat across from her, his eyes met hers for the briefest second. He didn't look away this time, like he was waiting for her to say something. Anything. Mabel took a slow breath, steadying herself. What do you want from me? The question felt raw, stripped of any pretense. She wasn't asking for answers, she was asking for the truth of what was between them now. Henry's fingers curled around the coffee cup, but he didn't drink. His eyes dropped to his hands, and for a moment, she thought he might say something. But he didn't. He was avoiding her, and that stung more than it should have. You don't owe me anything, he said, his voice thick. Not a thing. Mabel's lips tightened, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Then why the hell are you here? Henry's face shifted, his jaw tightening, but he didn't respond right away. Mabel watched him carefully, the anger in her chest burning hotter. I didn't want to be, he said at last. But I've got nowhere else to go. His voice softened, his eyes losing their hardness for a moment. I'm not running anymore. Mabel's stomach twisted at the words. He wasn't running. Not anymore. But she wasn't sure if that was better or worse. She shifted in her chair, the chair creaking under her weight, but she couldn't sit still. She couldn't stop the thoughts from racing through her mind. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about the life she thought she was living before he came. This was about something far more complicated, something buried deep, tied to both of them. Then what's this? She asked, her voice quieter this time, almost a whisper. What are we doing here? This house, it wasn't meant for this. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. It wasn't meant for you. Henry leaned back, his eyes still on her, but there was something more in them now. He looked tired. As if this was a fight he had been having for too long to give up. He reached for the coffee, his movements slow, as if the weight of the world was pressing on him. I didn't ask for any of it, Mabel. But now I'm stuck here with you. He paused. With the things I've done. You think I don't know that? Her voice caught in her throat, and she swallowed hard. I've been living with things I didn't ask for either. My whole life's been about surviving because of them. Because of him. Her eyes burned, but she wouldn't let herself cry. Not now. I'm pregnant with a man's child who's dead, and you think I don't understand that kind of weight? Henry's face tightened, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. I didn't come here to remind you of that. I didn't come here to make things harder. His voice cracked at the end of the sentence, but he quickly recovered. Mabel didn't flinch, though it felt like the air between them had just been shattered. She stood up too, the sudden movement catching him off guard. You didn't come here to make things harder, she asked, the bitterness slipping into her tone. Then why'd you come at all? You said it yourself, you didn't want to be here. She stepped closer to him, her chest rising and falling with each breath. What the hell are we doing now, Henry? For a moment, the two of them stood there, silent but not at all still. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for one of them to break. Neither spoke for a long time, but the weight of the silence grew heavier by the second. Finally, Henry spoke, his voice low, barely audible. I'm sorry. About your husband. About everything. Mabel's stomach twisted again, and for the first time in days, she felt her resolve crack. She wasn't sure if it was the pregnancy, the guilt, or the grief that was eating away at her, but something inside her softened. Just enough. She didn't let it show, but it was there. She crossed her arms, her gaze falling to the floor. It doesn't change anything. I've been sorry for too long, Henry. Too long. He didn't say anything else. The room filled with the hum of tension, their words hanging in the air like ghosts. Finally, Mabel turned away, her back to him now. She couldn't stand to look at him, couldn't stand to feel this pull between them. Go, she said softly, her voice breaking through the stillness. I can't do this anymore. Henry didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he exhaled and nodded, though she didn't see it. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Mabel clenched her fists at her sides, her teeth gritted. The words slipped out before she could stop them. You should. You should leave. Before you get any more tangled up in all this. But he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, closer than she had expected, and without a word, he pulled her into an embrace. For the briefest second, Mabel stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. And then she let herself fall into the quiet of it. The quiet that said more than words ever could. There was no escape. No way out of what was coming. But at least, for this moment, they weren't alone. Mabel sat at the table, the old letter in front of her, its edges worn, the ink faded with time. She had found it that morning, stuffed in the back of the drawer where she kept her husband's things. She hadn't meant to go looking for it. But it was like the house had turned against her, urging her to open the drawer, to pull out the paper that had sat untouched for over a year. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her husband's, though the words were something else entirely. It was a letter he had written to Henry. The very same Henry who had shown up on her doorstep nearly 2 weeks ago, battered and broken, claiming to be someone he wasn't. Mabel's fingers trembled as she held the letter, her mind spinning. She had known Henry's name was familiar, had known the weight of it in the back of her mind, but this was something she hadn't expected. The words on the page blurred as her mind tried to make sense of what she was reading. "God damn it," she whispered, her voice shaking as she read the final lines. The door creaked open behind her, and she didn't need to look to know it was Henry. She could feel his presence in the room like a weight pressing down on her. He hadn't been gone long, just a few minutes, but it felt like years had passed since she last saw him. Mabel didn't turn around. "You knew, didn't you?" There was a long pause before Henry answered. "I didn't want you to find that." She finally looked up, her eyes wild with confusion and anger. "You didn't want me to find it? You didn't want me to find out that my husband was writing letters to you like some damned friend? That the man I married was involved in something I don't understand?" Henry didn't answer immediately, and Mabel could see the guilt in his face. It was there, hiding behind the stoic mask he always wore. "You don't know everything," he said, his voice low. Mabel stood up, her chair scraping across the floor with a sharp sound. "Then make me understand, Henry. What the hell was he involved in? What was this circle you keep talking about? Who the hell are you?" Henry's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering toward the window before settling back on her. He stepped into the room, his gaze steady but filled with something darker, something that Mabel wasn't sure she wanted to see. "The circle is a debt, Mabel. A blood debt. One your husband didn't walk away from, no matter how hard he tried. And now it's mine. And yours, whether you like it or not." The words hit her like a slap. Blood debt. A part of her wanted to scream, to lash out, but she was frozen. She had known something was wrong, had felt it in the way her life had fallen apart, but this was too much. Henry continued, his voice tight with frustration. "Your husband didn't just work for the men he thought he was working for. He got too close. He started asking questions. They didn't like that. But they didn't kill him, Mabel. Not right away." Mabel's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Henry's eyes flickered to the floor. "He was meant to die, but he didn't. He ran. He hid. And then he started sending letters to me. Asking for help. I didn't want any part of it, but he kept writing. Kept begging me to fix things. To get him out of it." Mabel shook her head, the confusion and anger fighting for dominance inside her. "But you came here, Henry. You came to my home. You've been lying to me from the start. Why?" He stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I didn't have a choice, Mabel. I thought I could keep running, keep my distance, but they found me." "They always find you." His eyes darkened. "They found me through you. And now they're watching us both. Mabel's heart pounded in her chest. She took a step back, her mind racing as the pieces began to fall into place. So, what now? What do you want from me? Why are you still here? Henry ran a hand through his hair, his gaze falling to the floor. I'm here because you're part of it now. Whether you want to be or not. You married me. You tied yourself to this mess when you took me in. Then what the hell am I supposed to do with this? Mabel's voice was louder now, the frustration and fear leaking out. You're telling me my husband's dead because of some debt, and now it's mine, too? I didn't sign up for this, Henry. I know you didn't, he said quietly, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. But it's done. You're in it now, and there's no walking away. Mabel's knees felt weak, but she held herself up, refusing to let him see her falter. Then what? What happens now? Henry met her eyes, his face hardening again, as if he was making a decision. We fight. We get out. Or we die trying. Mabel felt a chill run through her, but she didn't look away. She could see the conviction in his eyes, the same conviction that had led him here in the first place. But the weight of it all was almost too much to bear. What about my child? Mabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. What about the baby? Henry didn't answer right away. His gaze flickered to her swollen belly, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Just determination. The child's part of it, too, he said, his words heavy. They'll come for the kid, too, if it comes to that. They'll come for everyone connected to this. Mabel felt her world slip further away from her. She had no idea what had gotten into her when she married him, no idea what she was inviting into her life. But now there was no turning back. So what do we do? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Henry stepped forward, his hand brushing against her arm. It was a small gesture, but one that felt like an anchor in the storm that was beginning to consume them both. We stay alive, he said, his voice low. We fight. And we make sure they don't take everything from us. Mabel nodded, though she wasn't sure she could even understand what that meant. She wasn't sure how any of this was going to end, but one thing was clear, nothing was ever going to be the same again. The storm outside had settled into a steady downpour, but it felt like the beginning of something much darker. The circle had closed around them, and there was no way out. The storm had passed by morning, but the air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, heavy and damp. Mabel sat at the kitchen table, hands folded in front of her, staring out the window as the last of the clouds broke apart, letting a pale sun shine through. The light was weak, casting long shadows across the room, but it didn't bring warmth. Nothing had felt warm in days, not since Henry had come into her life like a ghost, dragging everything with him. Henry had gone out early, without a word. She hadn't asked where he was going, hadn't cared enough to stop him. She was still trying to make sense of what he'd told her, still trying to process the weight of the secret he'd laid on her shoulders. Blood debts, betrayal, a name that had haunted her more than her late husband's face. But it wasn't just the guilt of his confession that had left her frozen in place. It was the child growing inside her, the child who was now a target for whatever darkness had followed Henry into this house. The door creaked open. Henry stepped inside, his boots heavy on the wood floors, his eyes bloodshot and weary. He'd been gone longer than he usually was, and she felt the tension tighten in her chest when she saw him. He hadn't come back the same, hadn't looked the same. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, staring at her like he was trying to find the right words, but couldn't. Mabel couldn't hold his gaze for long. She was too tired, too worn out from carrying the weight of everything he had just dropped in her lap. Where'd you go? Her voice was steady, but underneath, it cracked with something she couldn't hide. Henry leaned against the doorframe, his hand resting on the wood as if the weight of it was too much for him to bear. Just walked. Needed to think. His eyes were empty, dark circles under them from lack of sleep or maybe just the exhaustion of running from ghosts. You've been gone for hours, she said, her voice tight. What did you find out there? What the hell are you hiding from now? Henry exhaled, his breath heavy. He wasn't trying to hide anything now. He wasn't hiding from her, not anymore. I'm not hiding, Mabel. I'm just not sure how to keep you safe. Mabel felt the floor drop from under her feet. She stood up, the chair scraping against the floor, but she didn't move toward him. She couldn't. What the hell does that mean? Henry dropped his head, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The people I ran from, they know I'm here. They know everything about you. They know about the baby. They're not gonna stop until they get what they want. His voice dropped, quiet but urgent. You're part of this now, Mabel. And they'll come for you, come for the kid. I can't stop them. Mabel's breath caught in her throat. She backed away slowly, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. The baby, the only thing that still kept her tethered to any kind of hope, was now part of the nightmare Henry had brought with him. No. No. You don't get to do this to me. She shook her head, each word biting harder than the last. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask for you, I didn't ask for this house full of secrets and ghosts. And I sure as hell didn't ask to be dragged into your mess. Henry's gaze softened, but only for a moment. He took a step forward, and she immediately stepped back. Mabel, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean for you to get caught up in it. But we're already here. We're already in this thing. I can't go back. I can't leave you out here alone with them on the way. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of what he was asking. He wanted her to trust him. To let him stay. But how could she? How could she trust a man who had brought so much destruction into her life, a man who carried with him a curse she couldn't outrun? Then what the hell are we supposed to do? Mabel's voice cracked, the frustration and fear bubbling to the surface. How do we keep running when there's nowhere left to go? Henry looked at her, his eyes filled with something, regret, maybe, but also resolve. We don't run. We stand our ground. He reached for her then, his hand outstretched, but she didn't take it. We fight. Mabel shook her head, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Fight? What, you think we can just fight our way out of this? You think you can fight your way out of your past? Henry stepped closer, his voice low. I'm not fighting my past anymore. I'm fighting for you. For the baby. Mabel's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this man, this stranger who had stumbled into her life, could somehow fix everything. But she couldn't. The weight of what she knew, what she had learned, was too much for her to swallow whole. I don't even know who you are anymore, Henry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know who I am with you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The house was deathly quiet, save for the faint sound of rain dripping from the eaves outside. The baby inside her kicked, as if to remind her that there was still a future, still something to fight for. But what? She didn't know. She wasn't sure if there was anything left to fight for. Henry took another step forward, but this time, Mabel didn't pull away. She didn't step back. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't full of hatred or anger, it was something else. Something quieter. We'll figure it out, Henry said, his voice softer this time, like a promise. We'll make it work. Together. Just give me a chance to make this right. Mabel stared at him, trying to read the truth in his eyes. He had no idea what she was up against. He had no idea what she had already lost. But as she stood there, with his words hanging in the air, something inside her shifted. She wasn't sure what it meant, or if it would even be enough. But for the first time in a long while, she felt the smallest flicker of something. A possibility. She nodded slowly. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was something. All right, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Together. Henry nodded, and for a moment, there was nothing but the quiet between them, the weight of the storm finally clearing from the air. They didn't know what would come next, or how long they had before everything came crashing down. But for now, they stood together, silently, in the eye of the storm that was only just beginning. And outside, the rain began to fall again. The sun was low in the sky when the sheriff arrived, his dusty boots grinding against the dirt as he approached the porch. Mabel had seen him before, years ago, when her husband had been alive and well, when everything had felt simpler. But now, nothing felt simple. Nothing was what it had seemed. She was in the barn, sorting through the old tools, when she heard the faint creak of the front door opening. Her heart skipped, and for a moment, her breath caught in her chest. It wasn't just the sheriff's arrival, it was everything that came with it. The weight of her decisions, the things she had let in. The life she had been trying to keep out. She stepped outside, the cool breeze carrying the scent of fresh earth. The sheriff was standing by his horse, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. His eyes, dark and familiar, found hers immediately. He didn't smile. He never did. "Sheriff." Her voice was steady, but her hands, resting at her sides, were shaking. He tipped his hat, eyes scanning the ranch behind her, but his gaze lingered on her. "Mabel." He nodded, his voice rough, like it hadn't been used in days. "I need to talk to you." "Inside." Mabel's stomach turned, but she nodded and turned toward the house. Henry was inside, sitting by the window, watching the darkening sky, his face distant. The sound of the sheriff's boots on the floorboards made Henry stiffen, his eyes snapping to the door. Mabel stepped inside first, not looking at Henry, keeping her focus on the sheriff. "What's this about?" The sheriff didn't waste any time. "I'm looking for a fugitive," he said, his voice tight, clipped. "A man named Henry Walker." Mabel's breath hitched in her throat, but she kept her composure, turning toward Henry. His face remained impassive, but the tension in his shoulders was obvious. Mabel swallowed, trying to steady herself. "What are you talking about?" "He's been here for weeks." Her voice was almost a plea, but she forced it down. "I told you he's not the man you're looking for." The sheriff looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I didn't ask you what you told me, Mabel. I'm telling you what I know. He's not just some wanderer passing through." He paused, letting the silence hang in the room. "He's a criminal, and I've got orders to bring him in." Mabel's mind was racing, the words she wanted to say stuck in her throat. The price of her choice was too high now. Too many lies, too many pieces that didn't fit, and now the sheriff was here to put it all in place. Henry stood then, his chair scraping against the wooden floor as he moved toward the sheriff. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low, controlled. But Mabel could hear the edges of something darker in it. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The sheriff didn't flinch, didn't move an inch. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. You've been hiding out here, making a fool of me for too long, Henry. And now I'm done letting you take whatever you want." His voice rose, the tension in the room almost suffocating. Mabel stepped between them, feeling the heat of the moment crash down on her. "Stop," she said, her voice sharp. "Both of you. This isn't helping." The sheriff turned to her, his gaze heavy, but there was something in his eyes that made her feel small. She was caught between two men, one who had become a stranger, and the other, a man who had been part of a life she wanted to forget. She wasn't sure where her loyalties lay anymore. "I'm sorry, Mabel," the sheriff said, his voice softening for a moment, but only for a moment. "But I can't let him go. Not after what he's done." He looked past her, at Henry, his gaze hardening again. "You don't get to run anymore." Mabel's heart raced. She could feel the walls closing in around her. She didn't know what Henry had done, didn't want to know, but she knew it was bad. And now, the sheriff was here, demanding justice, demanding payment for things Mabel couldn't even begin to understand. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice shaky, but she still held her ground. "You don't know what this is. You don't know what he's been through. You don't know what's been done to him." The sheriff was unmoved. "I don't care what you think, Mabel. I've got my orders, and I'm not backing down." His jaw clenched as he took a step toward Henry, his hand moving to the holster at his side. Henry didn't flinch. His eyes never left the sheriff's, and for a long moment, there was nothing but the tension between them. But then, Henry spoke, his voice cold, steady. "You're making a mistake." Mabel's heart pounded in her chest, the fear of what could happen next threatening to consume her. The weight of everything she had tried to hold together was starting to break. She looked at the sheriff, then back at Henry, and the silence stretched between them like an abyss. "I've made my choice," Mabel said, her voice stronger now, her hands clenched at her sides. "You're not taking him. You're not taking anyone." The sheriff's eyes flickered with surprise, and for a moment, Mabel thought she saw something like disappointment there. But it was gone just as quickly. He shifted, his hand still resting on his gun, but he didn't move. "Not yet." Mabel stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "You're done here, Sheriff. You're not taking him. Not today." The sheriff's gaze lingered on her for a moment, like he was weighing his options. Then, with a sharp exhale, he finally moved back, his hand falling from his gun. "You're making a mistake, Mabel. A big one." She didn't flinch. "I've made worse." The sheriff paused at the door, looking back at her and Henry, but he didn't speak. He just tipped his hat, his eyes cold, before he stepped outside, the door slamming shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Mabel stood still, her breath shallow, trying to process what had just happened. She couldn't believe she had just sent the sheriff away, that she had made a decision that might cost her everything. But there was no going back now. Henry turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice rough. "He'll be back." Mabel nodded, her eyes locked on his. "I know. But I couldn't let you go. Not like that." She didn't know what it meant, this thing between them. She didn't know how it would end. But for the first time in days, she felt like she had made the right choice. For now, it was enough. The wind howled outside, pushing the night air against the old windows, rattling the shutters with each gust. Inside, the house was still, quieter than it had been in days. Mabel sat in the dim light of the living room, the flickering shadows cast by the candle in the corner dancing across the worn walls. The air smelled of burnt wood and old secrets, a scent that had become far too familiar. Henry was across the room, sitting near the hearth, his face illuminated by the dying fire. He hadn't said much since the sheriff had left. Mabel hadn't said much either. The weight of everything, the choices they'd made, the lives they'd ruined, the inevitable future ahead of them, pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. She could still feel the sheriff's presence in the house, like a ghost lingering in the corners. Her heart was racing, but she didn't know why. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken between them, something that felt bigger than the silence they'd shared since the sheriff's departure. She stood, slowly, her feet silent against the floorboards as she walked toward the fireplace. Henry didn't look up when she approached, his eyes fixed on the fire, his expression unreadable. She stopped beside him, the warmth of the flames not quite enough to chase away the chill in the room. "You said it was supposed to be a choice," she said quietly, her voice thick with the weight of her own words. "You said we had the power to choose." Henry's eyes flickered to hers, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the bottle of whiskey sitting on the mantel and poured himself a drink. The amber liquid sloshed into the glass, the sound of it too loud in the silence. He took a long drink before setting the glass down with a quiet clink. "Choice is a funny thing, Mabel," he finally said, his voice rough. "Most of the time, it's an illusion. You think you have it, but it's just the quiet that lets you believe it." He looked at her then, his eyes darker than the shadows in the room. "I didn't want this. Not with you. Not like this." Mabel took a step back, the words stinging more than she wanted them to. "So what was this all for, Henry? What do you want from me?" He didn't answer right away, his eyes drifting back to the fire. His jaw clenched as though he was holding back something, anger, regret, something that she didn't understand. "I didn't want to pull you into this, Mabel," he said quietly. "I didn't want to bring you down with me." She swallowed hard, the sting of his words mixing with the bitterness in her chest. "But you did. You already did. And now here we are, stuck in a life neither of us ever asked for. You think this is what I wanted? His gaze met hers again, and this time, there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Something softer, something that made her hesitate. He stepped toward her, his presence filling the space between them. No. I don't think this is what either of us wanted. But it's the price we pay, isn't it? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The truth of it hung between them, heavy and suffocating. The choices they had made, the lies they had told, had led them here, to this moment. And she didn't know how to fix it. Didn't know how to stop it. Instead of speaking, she simply nodded, her eyes falling to the floor. Henry took another step toward her, his breath steady. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mabel, he said softly, his voice low and earnest. I'm asking for a chance to make this right. Mabel's chest tightened, the emotions swirling in her mind too much to keep contained. She didn't know how to answer. Didn't know if she could. The weight of everything, the pregnancy, the guilt, the grief, pressed down on her until she couldn't breathe. Without thinking, she closed the distance between them, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. The warmth of his body seeped into her skin, but it wasn't enough to chase away the cold. She didn't know what she was doing. Didn't know if it even mattered anymore. But she kissed him. It was slow, tentative at first, as though neither of them knew what they were doing. But then, something shifted. The kiss deepened, the intensity growing, and suddenly, the world outside the house didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the heat between them, the desperate need to find some kind of connection in the mess they had made of their lives. When they finally broke apart, neither of them spoke. The silence that followed was louder than anything they had said before. Mabel's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, but the weight of the moment hung between them. It wasn't love. It wasn't anything like what she had imagined. But it was something else. Something raw. Something real. Mabel stepped back, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. What now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry stood still, his expression unreadable. Now we face what's coming. His words were slow, deliberate. And we deal with it. Together. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at him, unsure of what that even meant. They had no future, no certainty. Just this strange, broken thing between them that neither of them understood. She nodded, even though she wasn't sure what she was agreeing to. There was no going back, no more time for second chances. The decisions they had made had sealed their fate. And whatever was coming next, they would face it. Together. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting its flickering shadows across the room, as if the house itself was watching them, waiting for the inevitable. Mabel turned away from Henry, her eyes catching the darkening sky through the window. The world outside was still, but inside, everything was shifting. Everything was changing. And she didn't know if she was ready for it. But there was no turning back now. Not anymore. The rain had stopped, but the land still felt soaked, the earth thick with the weight of the storm that had passed through. The quiet that followed was deafening, the kind that seemed to settle in every corner of the house, in every shadow. It was the kind of silence that had become their companion, constant and unavoidable, a reminder of everything unsaid and undone. Mabel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. She hadn't bothered to drink it. The steam still curled from the surface, but it felt like everything in the house, everything in her life, was cold, disconnected. She was waiting for something to happen. Waiting for a shift, for something to change the course of this life she hadn't asked for but had been swept into all the same. Henry was outside, working with the horses. She hadn't seen him much the last few days, he'd kept to himself, mostly, giving her the space she hadn't asked for but needed. His absence felt just as heavy as his presence, like there was always something hanging in the air, something unspoken. Mabel stood up suddenly, pushing the chair back with a loud scrape. She didn't know what she was doing, just that she couldn't sit still anymore. The house felt like it was closing in on her, like she couldn't breathe in the quiet. She walked to the window, her hand brushing the curtain aside as she looked out. The wind was picking up again, rustling the trees outside. It was a sound she had learned to ignore, but today it felt different. There was a shadow by the barn. Henry. She could see him through the open door, his body hunched as he worked with the animals. She hadn't asked him why he had been avoiding her, but she knew it wasn't just because of the sheriff. It wasn't just the danger that had followed him here. It was something else, something deeper. They both knew it. But neither of them said it. She moved toward the door, her boots light on the wooden floor. She stepped outside, the air cool against her skin, the earth still wet beneath her feet. It was the kind of morning that felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Henry didn't notice her approach at first, too focused on the horse he was trying to calm. His movements were sharp, almost aggressive, like he was trying to force the animal into submission. Mabel stopped just a few feet away, her gaze on his back. He didn't acknowledge her, and for a moment, she wondered if he even knew she was there. Mabel. His voice was soft but firm, like he had been waiting for her to speak first. He didn't turn to look at her, just kept working with the horse. We need to talk. She didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure what to say. They hadn't really talked since that night, the night everything had shifted between them. Since the kiss. Since the promise. Everything had changed, but it hadn't. They were still here, in the same house, living the same lives. The only difference was the weight of the things unsaid between them. I know, she said finally, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I know we do. The silence between them stretched, and Mabel felt the familiar weight of the moment settle over her like a thick blanket. They were both pretending, in different ways, that things could go back to how they were before the sheriff, before the lies, before everything that had happened. But it couldn't. It wouldn't. Henry let out a long breath and finally turned to face her, his eyes tired, the exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. He wasn't the same man who had walked into her life weeks ago, broken and bleeding. He wasn't the same man who had sat by the fire and told her stories that felt too personal, too raw. He was someone else now. Someone hardened, someone she didn't know how to reach anymore. What are we doing, Mabel? His voice was quieter now, tinged with something she couldn't place, something heavy and worn. You can't keep pretending this doesn't mean something. You can't keep pretending this isn't what it is. Mabel's heart tightened. She didn't know what he was asking for. She didn't know if she was ready to answer. She'd already made too many choices, too many promises, and she wasn't sure which ones were worth keeping anymore. But he was standing there, looking at her like he had been waiting for this moment, like he had been waiting for her to make up her mind. I don't know what it is, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I don't know what this is between us. What we're supposed to do. I don't know if I even know how to survive this. She took a step closer to him, her chest tight with the admission. But I can't leave. I can't turn my back on it. Henry was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, his hand reaching out to her, but he stopped just short of touching her. The distance between them felt like miles, and Mabel felt the ache in her chest as she looked at him, waiting for something. Waiting for him to tell her that it was going to be okay. That they could fix this, that it wasn't too late. I never meant to drag you into this, he said, his voice rough, filled with regret. I never meant for you to be caught in the middle of this war I'd been running from. But I am what I am, Mabel. And now we're both here. Together. Whether we want to be or not. She nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words sink into her bones. They were stuck in this life, stuck with each other. They couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. Not after everything they had done. So what happens now, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What's left for us? Henry didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his eyes searching hers, like he was trying to find the answer, too. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. We face it, he said simply. Whatever comes. We face it. Mabel swallowed hard, the words settling in her chest like something heavy, something she couldn't shake. They weren't ready for this. They hadn't been ready from the start. But there was no turning back now. As she looked at him, at the man she hadn't truly known but had somehow come to depend on, she realized that there was no right answer. No clean way out. They were bound by something darker than love, something more desperate, something that neither of them could escape. "We'll fight it," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "We'll survive it. And whatever comes next, we'll face it. Together." Henry didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. He stepped closer to her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the distance between them was gone. And though they didn't know what tomorrow would bring, they knew they wouldn't face it alone. The wind picked up again, rustling the trees outside, but inside, it was still. And for a moment, it felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for whatever came next. But in that silence, in that space between them, there was something else, a shared understanding. Something broken. Something unspoken. But it was enough. For now.